Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pixelists Podcast about all the nerdy things we love and enjoy. As always, we're your hosts. I'm Will, that's Blake, and today we're here to talk about our B&B D&D, but it's not our CR B&B D&D, it's our WWW B&B D&D. Now, I know no one knows what I'm talking about. Yeah, we need to stop.
We have to stop.
Yeah, but for those curious, bread and butter Dungeons and Dragons, because that's what we like to talk about. But yes, today we are talking The Wizard, the Witch, and the Wild One of Worlds Beyond Number. Episode 17, I think. I
believe. Say my name.
That's right. But before we jump into that, as always, quick couple of announcements. We're actually hot off our first ever YouTube live stream. So for any of you guys that came to that, thank you so much. It was a blast. We plan on making that a regular occurrence. Those will be, at least for the time being, every Friday at 1 p.m. Central Time. This first one was just about 30 minutes. That's going to be the typical plan. So just a quick little hangout. Come catch up, ask us any questions. We'll probably talk a little CR, a little Worlds Beyond Number. But yeah, it was really fun. So, and I guess, are those VODs going to be available?
They should be on the channel,
for anyone that cares, yeah, if you missed it, that should be on the channel to check out.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of fun. Sorry, were you about to say something?
No.
Oh. Other than that, just the normal stuff. We're talking Worlds Beyond, we're talking Critical Role, and I think it's just those two things right now.
And D&D, just general D&D stuff too.
Yeah.
If you have a question about DMing or running your own games, or have your own ideas you want to share, that's a great place to do it too.
Yeah, so definitely check that out. We would love to have you. And in addition to that, as always, you should join our Discord. It'll be linked down in the description below. It's been really fun. We have a lot of people join recently, have some really fun D&D conversations. And I know if you're watching this video, you're the choir, I'm preaching to you, but would love to have more Worlds Beyond community members. So if you haven't joined already, come join, get that discussion going. But we also have watch parties every Sunday night, not related necessarily to D&D, just watching movies or sometimes one-shots. It's been a lot of fun, and I think we might start doing some like Christmas holiday movies to get in the spirit of the season. So that'll be every Sunday night at 7:30 p.m. Central Time.
I was trying to think of like if I had a really awful like Netflix Christmas movie to just like be like, we're watching this, but I don't know any, so I can't.
I'm sure there's plenty.
I couldn't make that joke, so. but anywho,
yeah. Anything else before we dive in?
I don't think so.
Alrighty, well, without further ado, let's get into some Worlds Beyond Number. And as always, we're going to start out with a recap to get everybody back up to speed. And so this is episode 17, Say My Name. So we pick up in the Citadel, and it's a hot day on the training courts where Ursulon is training with Steel and is basically getting just bested by her. She never gets tired. She also is like super calm and controlled the whole time, basically just showcasing how skilled she is. They finish up their little session, and Ursulon mentions that he does want to start using a shield. Steel's like, okay, we can get that figured out. And she also says that, with Ame, on the road to recovery now, I don't know what your plan is, Ursulon, but just should you want, you are welcome to continue living here. And Ursulon's like, I really love it here, but, like staying in one place is something I've never done. But as long as Suvi and Ame are here, I'll be here. And Steel follows up and is like, well, if you weren't going to stay here and you were going to go somewhere else, where would you go? And Ursulon's like, I don't know. And then Steel's like, Suvi told me a little bit, but I don't know the full story. But I just wanted to let you know that the Citadel in the past has helped spirits get back to the spirit world that were trapped here. So should that be something you're interested in, you have, my full resources to try to help you do that. And I feel like she's kind of probing for more information on how he was trapped here, but Ursulon doesn't reveal anything else about it.
Right.
So it's been about a week since Ame woke up. We kind of cut to them. The fox is getting plump and reinvigorated after, having been up for a month. And Ame has just done a lot of exploring over the past week, inquiring about certain people that she now remembers from getting all of her memories back. Specifically, there's mention of Golt the Artificer, Sly of the Brooch, Pomeroy, I believe. And she's just doing investigation checks and actually rolls a nat 20. So Brennan's like, okay, I'll tell you everything. And he says that she realizes that this curse that was on her was kind of arresting her coronation as the Witch of the World's Heart. Effectively, that there wasn't a Witch of the World's Heart, even though Ame, was alive and existed. And now that she has her memories back, there kind of is suddenly a Witch of the World's Heart again. And he also tells her that, Grandmother Rin knew and liked wizards, but she never really collaborated directly with the Citadel, just specific wizards. So Ame does find people here that are very happy to share and help her with information. She learns that Golt the Artificer works in Haverwort at a place called Tilliver Mill, and that the spirit Pomeroy works in Zhao Court at the Kashaw Collection in Gossamer Plaza, and the wizard Sly works in Kabani Court, one of the grand diviners, and specifically the head diviner of the Office of Preemptory Catastrophic Deviation. So then we cut to Suvi. What has she been up to over the past few days? And she has just been going above and beyond, trying to be like the best little wizard apprentice prior to her name day that is coming up. So she is just trying to do all the errands, all the the chores, all of her duties to the best of her ability, so that no one thinks she is undeserving to take the name Sky. We then cut, and it's to the Pyrian Dome, in the middle of or I don't know if it's the middle of the night, but I think it is, because everything is dark except for these eerie green, green and purple fire around the Pyrian Dome. And there are 5 seats with all of the archmages of the Citadel. Silence, Suvi's mentor, the Archmage Serenity, the Archmage Sorrow, the Archmage Saber, and the Archmage Sand. And off to the side from them is Steel. Silence is first to speak and says, "She who has come forth to receive a cloak of shadows that might conceal her name, that she could wield the power of her title and obscure the comings of her character, the origins of her history, the to and fro of days well spent, might be managed behind a word of power. Suvi she is called, and her name," and Steel joins in here and whispers, "Sovereign Cadbaracat." Silence then continues, "Speak now and tell the word in order and defiance of what may be perceived what you truly are." And in kind of an internal monologue, Suvi is thinking about the version of the sky that she will claim for her own. It's the one she saw when she was 6 years old, on the night that everything happened with her parents. And there were explosions in the sky, but it was also snowing, and the stars were visible. And as the world was being blown apart, the sky kind of contained it all. And she remembers never seeing anything that big before. So that is the sky that she claims. And she says, "I am the wizard Sky." The Archmage Saber then stands and says, "What power then that the great firmament might rain down, weather, thunder, lightning, great powers, to cover all, and with its judgment mete out what it sees fit." The Archmage Sand says, "What cannot be seen, whose weightless weight we bear down each day upon our shoulders, turns the mountains into dust, subtlety in the movement in the spaces unseen, the dominion of your title." The Archmage Sorrow, "Things eternal that have been with us since the dawn of time, wisdom in the watchfulness and a constant partner, ever above, defined by its distance." The Archmage Serenity, "Movement, life, in a desert beyond which no growing thing can be seen from our vantage point. We see the beginnings, wisps of vapor that will become storms, rain to fall upon our forests and fields, a partner in a dance to sustain the world forever." And finally, the Archmage Silence, The sky is not the weather nor the wind. The sky holds all things. Let it be known that vastness is yours. The sorrows it will bring you, that you and your road are vast and broad and lead to all places. Many who have destiny curse it, but what a burden to be able to choose any path under the sun. She is called Sky. And it's at this point, lightning strikes the top of the Irian, and all across Umora, every instance of the name Suvi or Suverin Cadbarakat is stricken and replaced by the word Sky. The name is swallowed up by her name cloak, except in the places in which it was written by one from whom it was given. So a handful of places, a handful of people still know that she is Suvi. And right after this, we kind of have a quick like flashback section where Suvi goes to both Ursulon and Ame and explicitly gives them her name so that they can remember that she is Suvi. So she does that, and then we cut back to the present. She is called Sky, and she and Steel embrace. And Steele's like, huge fan of your previous work, referring to like the previous Wizard Sky. And she says, you'll put them all to shame. And Suvi's just like, I'm going to do my best to live up to the love and care and time that you invested in me. And she's like, that's the first promise made by the third Wizard Sky. And she says, you have my promise as well. I will do everything I can do to be worthy of your devotion, and to the memory of those that came before. And she says, you know what? Or Suvi says, you know, can I now learn my parents' names? And Steele says that, yeah, I'll take you tomorrow because tonight Suvi is going to go celebrate. And you want to take it from there?
Yeah. So in the last probably like 40 minutes to an hour, it is basically a massive party for Suvi. And Suvi has told her friends, like, you know, we're going to get wild tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun. And it is. There are people from all over. There's tons of food and drink. And, you know, Bear, the strongest man in Silbury, is remembering why he loves the Citadel so much, as he's enjoying plenty of that food as well. There's a moment during the party, though, where Suvi and Ame go to the bathroom, which Brennan describes as, you know, smelling like a bathroom with like some sort of like magical cleaner for it. And while they're in here, they note this light coming from the ceiling through like the windows that are above them. And they know this to be the scry spell. It's then when they look out at the windows on the sides to see what Brennan describes as horrible creatures, spider-like creatures with a single eye, to which Ame identifies as, was it pixies or fairies?
Fairies, I believe.
Yeah, fairies. The fairies take one of their tendrils and poke on the glass and actually break through it. And two fairies make their way in, and it's kind of hard to describe. They are looking for Ame. They've come to find the Witch of the World Heart, and they immediately are asking, like, is this your castle? Like, is this your place? And by the way, there is an amazing voice that is overlaid over Brennan's voice. It's just really great. And they begin to talk to Ame, and they are here to represent, I think it's the Witch of the Wind and Stars, yes. I believe. And they essentially, it is a witch who's part of the enclave that Grandmother Wren was part of. And the witch is reaching out to basically be like, hey, it's been some time and we haven't heard from you. While this is happening, Ursulon is enjoying the party, and there is a character who walks in, I think Temuri, which is, I believe, one of the spells personified, right? Is that what a Temuri was?
I couldn't remember. I was going to ask you.
I think that's what it is. But this Temuri, they connect eyes, and Ursulon begins speaking to her. Her name is, I think, Adina. And Adina is seeking to find Archmage Saber, who is mysteriously missing from the party. And curiously, it seems to not be found anywhere. Adina leaves. Ursulon sees that in the bathroom there is these fairies and some conversation happening, so he begins to like keep people out of the bathroom, and his immediate answer is people are having sex in there. And so people are like, oh, and then the fox hears that excuse and goes up near the door and begins like being the perfect fox that he is, just saying really funny things, trying to pretend like he's having sex. As Ame and Suvi or Sky are talking to the fairies, Ame decides to basically write a note to send to the Witch of the Wind and Stars. It's basically like, I'm sorry, I've been delayed. Signed the Witch of the World Heart. But as she gives the letter away, one of the fairies asks if they can have a name. And Ame says, which Brennan takes to be a name. And the fairy explodes. And then the second one asks if they can have a name too, to which they're like, hang on. This seems like we don't fully understand what's happening here. And I think there was also like some order given, like where the fairy like ripped its own head off and then like put it back on.
I think the fox ripped into one.
The fox bit one in half, and then it came back together. But then the second one like pulled off its own head and then like put it back on or something. Very terrifying. While this conversation is happening, Silver, Suvi's boyfriend-esque, walks up and is like, "Hey, Ursulon, is everything okay in the bathroom?" And he's like, "Oh yeah." He's keeping this excuse that people are having sex in the bathroom, and he's like, "But I saw Ame and Suvi going in there," and he's like, "Yes," and he's like, "Oh, I didn't know they," and he's like, no, it's not them, it's the fox. The fox is like pleasuring himself on a doll or something. And he's like, and Suvi and Ame are just in there with it. And he's like, yeah. And anyway, Silver ends up leaving. I think the way Brennan described it was, he was like, nope, that's not for me. Like Silver like left the party or something. Ursulon comes in and is basically like, hey, I think I may have made things kind of awkward with you and Silver. Suvi leaves, the party kind of comes to an end, and she basically chases after Silver. And outside of the party, it's revealed that Silver has some pretty warm feelings to Suvi and was kind of caught off guard that she might have another relationship, and it kind of hurt a little bit. And Suvi also mentions two things like, hey, I heard the Archmage Saber is missing, to which Silver's like, well, that doesn't really make much sense. But the second detail is she tells about the fairies who were scrying and who came to the Citadel, and Silver seems really bothered by this. Not bothered, surprised, like, wait, they came here to the Citadel? To which Suvi's like, yeah, isn't that weird? All that to say, we cut to the very end of the night where Suvi is going to Silver's place to spend the night, and Silver is tears down his face, is I think either reading a letter or like getting his bags together, and he mentions that one of the garrisons has fallen and he must leave that night. And that is episode 17, Say My Name, of Worlds Beyond Number. And if you want to hear our full thoughts and discussion, check the link for the full video.
Yes, sir. Boom, boom. I think I forgot to say that at the beginning, so I'm glad you said it there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Fantastic episode.
It was.
Really fun.
As always, the sound design so good, especially during the name cloak section.
The name cloak section was awesome. I thought the pixies, or I keep saying pixies, the fairies were just like so perfectly horrifying.
Yeah.
And you could just tell they were having such a freaking awesome time. I think I don't think it was Aabria, maybe it was Aabria who said it, but one of them said maybe it was Erika, but like if you could see Brennan's face right now as he's, because there was like the line too, like they were like, is this like your throne room or something? And like
yes.
The bathroom, like, don't you poop? And it like, showed its butthole or lack of a butthole, I guess. But it's always good when players are having a good time.
Yeah, that whole section was really funny. I love that recurring bit of like, is this your castle? It's like, no, this is a bathroom. All right, a few different things to talk about here. I guess we could just go in chronological order. we have the name cloak ceremony. We've got a little bit more shed on the kind of the world building lore with this. So we pick a name, and the real name is literally stricken from the planet via
Very Matron of Ravens-esque, like
yeah,
the name is gone.
yeah,
Which I thought was very interesting.
yeah. It reminded me of that, and it also reminded me of the Spider-Man with Doctor Strange, like casting the spell to make everyone
right
forget him or whatever. Very, very interesting, because I'm curious, because something we talked about in previous episodes regarding the names was how like none of the younger generation knows the older generation's names, because they've all had their name ceremonies by then, so they all go by their pseudonyms, whereas like an older person would know the younger person's name because they have not had their name cloak yet.
right
I thought it was like a method of power and a method of keeping people down. But now I'm curious, because it seems like this spell wiped, like, so for example, all the archmages know Suvi's name, but do they now that this has happened, if Suvi didn't explicitly give them her name like she did with Ursulon and Ame? So I'm curious, like, I think for the most part, most adults that knew Suvi's name now don't, but I'm curious if there are any exceptions that are built into whatever this spell is, where like certain members, i.e. the archmages, potentially Steel, whoever, do still retain the name, or if it truly is gone for everyone aside from who Suvi explicitly gave it to.
I feel like the archmages maybe would still have that kind of like insight, but other than them, like literally every person, unless they've been explicitly given the name by Suvi, now think of her as Sky. Because that was interesting too. I think Brennan even said, like, even when you say Suvi, people hear Sky.
Yeah.
Like, that's how powerful the magic is.
Yeah, that was really cool. Which we didn't get a little vignette of Suvi giving her name to Steel. But I mean, like, the impression, I think, is that Steel still knows it.
Yeah.
Is that
I think so.
You think so too?
Yeah, I think she gave it to Steel, Ame, and Ursulon, and maybe Silver. I don't know.
I don't think she did give it to. Well, I guess we don't know how it works.
Hypothetically, is what I mean, though.
Oh, right. I just meant because there's that scene where Ame is like testing it and kind of teasing him, being like, "Why is the Suvi blue?" And he hears, "Why is the sky blue?" So I wonder if, and maybe it still wouldn't work in that same way, where like, can people that both know it hear when somebody else says it? But if that is true, then he doesn't know.
Since Suvi's parents are dead, they can't give the names. So
yeah, that's interesting. Like, so
Steel can on their behalf.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe because they're dead. Like maybe that magic isn't in place anymore. I don't know. That's interesting. Or maybe because she was gifted the name, she can give it, which would be like an interesting thing of like, who do you trust? But it does seem to need to be some sort of explicit ceremony, or else, Ame saying it to Silver, he would have heard it since she knows it. So it must be complex, but that is interesting to think about. But yeah, so I'm fascinated by the name stuff. We got a little bit of, I mean, really not even really. Oh no, we did. I wrote it down. We got a little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? History, I guess, or insight onto the name Sky, because we know that she is the third one to have it. Where did I write this down?
The first one was involved or responsible for the sand being created around the Citadel.
Yes. So the first one was one of the OG crew that founded the Citadel. And so there were, in that same section, there were some dates listed. So I wrote these down to kind of help flesh out our world building here, because also Steele mentions that in like the grand scheme of the world, wizardry is very new. So the Citadel's only about 200 years old. Like they're about to come up on the 200th anniversary. The year currently is 1670. So that puts the Citadel at around 1470. We were told the first College of Summoners was 1440. So I don't know if that's like the precursor to the Citadel, or just like a different magical sect that was maybe like the first official. And then that the Lingua Arcana, which is spell casting, as far as I think,
That's like the core religious text, I think, of the Citadel.
yeah, that was only coined 100 years prior to the College of Summoners, so roughly
Oh, yeah. Okay.
1340. So really, the years 1670. I'm not saying magic didn't exist before that, but magic as like a thing that was studied and practiced is only
Yeah.
300 years old in a world that's 1600 years old. So
Yeah.
like that's kind of crazy that it's that fresh, and
It's pretty fascinating for sure.
and it kind of similar to our own human history, really, like in terms of like the industrial and technological revolution, like technology and stuff is happening so fast in the grand scheme of like life on this planet, So it's crazy to think of like one of the main conflicts that we've theorized so far in this story is kind of like the world of spirits versus the world of sorcerers. And it's interesting that even in such like a blip for wizards existing, like they've already become such a big thing. And like, I don't want to like just straight up call them evil, because it's gray, but like they're clearly like taking territory and I don't mean
It's
like
very
yeah.
What this is very in line with like Brennan's background of I don't say like being anti-capitalist, but just very well read and very aware of, like, I guess it's such a silly thing to say, but aware of history.
Yeah.
But it gives me vibes of like you mentioned, the Industrial Revolution, and like it's advancing so quickly, but we haven't developed there's no OSHA, there's no safety regulations, and the whole like safety regulations are written in blood. Like all of this is relatively very new, and I think you're right. Like there's a hard and fast element to it that's kind of brutish and invasive and reckless, and which is kind of exciting in a weird way. Like ooh, what's going to happen or what is happening? But and I guess partly why there's war. They're in a time of war too. So which is interesting. Steele's stories of like the different, with lack of a better term, ley lines, and like when there was great trade, when there was teleportation. Like I wonder if that's even only in the last few hundred years that Steele's talking about. I took it to mean even longer, but maybe we're still relatively talking about a short history.
Yeah, prior to this episode, I would agree that I thought it was like a long time ago that those things were happening. But now with this context, I think it must all be within like the last 200-300 years max. Yeah, all just really crazy. And again, I don't know. It's gray, right? Like it's a gray thing. Like it's not like one thing is inherently good, one thing is inherently bad, but it's just interesting to see like the invasive species, if I can say that, of like wizards and their magic to the spirits and their magic, because like for the last 1400 years, the spirits have been the ones to like control that entire realm. And now it's like, not that it is actually 50-50, but like that's what's coming to a head, it feels like. So
right.
And I wonder if this is also something we talked about, that dynamic in a whole is also what some of these conversations have been alluding to, with like, the Coven of Witches talking to Rin, being like, something needs to happen here. Especially with Rin being the witch of humanity, essentially. I just feel like all these things are at least loosely connected.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and there was a Reddit thread about how it does feel like there's a lot of lore coming at us fast, and it is kind of hard to keep track of all of it. But it's nice though, because we are getting a lot of history about Umora, whereas the first like 14, 15 episodes, I guess 14 episodes, it was very localized to Port Talon. We're definitely getting a sense of our characters in this world and all the factors in play, and it's kind of exciting. It's fun. It kind of feels like Brennan is continuing to like paint and craft and build these things, which I think he's doing a great job at too.
Yeah, me too. It definitely, especially these last three or so, there's definitely been kind of massive lore bombs, but I've liked it, and I think that like I like that approach to it. Because it's something like, and I'm sure there's examples of everything under the sun, but like, and I know this is a I know this is a touchy subject for us these days, but like with Game of Thrones, like when you walk into season 1, episode 1, there's all these names and places, the Lord of this, you know, the House of that. And it's a lot. Like, and you, unless you read the books, you couldn't possibly like keep up or understand with what everything that was being said. But
Right.
that's realistic to me. You know, like it's not as
Right.
if you walk into a story and you've been given an encyclopedia to study prior to it.
Right.
So I love this type of lore coming out in this way because it is a very rich and deep world that Brennan has built, and he's drip feeding us that. And in these last 3 episodes, sometimes a bit heavier, but in times that make sense. And I think it's really fun to put those pieces together, like citing our last 10 minutes of conversation, like thinking about those dates and putting like, okay, so does that mean this?
Right.
I personally love that stuff. And I think if you're the type of person that's like watching 2 random dudes talk about it, you probably love it too. But so give me that all day. But yeah, I would be curious of like a more, like I think a more casual listener, if I could call it that, would probably be pretty lost. Like if you just like, oh, I listen to Worlds Beyond, and you're like, oh, what'd you think of Indri, the Witch of the, you know, the Sun of the Stars?
Yeah.
I'd be like, who?
Well, and this is very like stylistic to Brennan too, in that Brennan, I feel like Brennan can't help himself with like everything, like every name is like based in Latin, and like,
yeah,
you know, I could not spell anything he names. But it's like in Calamity, I mean, I think it was episode 2, maybe 3. One of the 2 had like a massive lore bomb, and a friend of mine who I recommended it to, who had never played D&D before, he was like, I'm really liking it, but man, this episode was really hard to follow. And I was like, it was a heavy lore episode. He is more casual. Whereas me and you, I know we're kind of junkies for like, give me the lore, give it all to me. So
yeah, but yeah, Calamity is a great example. Same situation. Because even being familiar with Critical Role, that didn't really help me that much, because this was a brand new place. Like all these titles that they have, it's like, oh, what does that mean? But yeah, it's funny you say you don't know how to spell stuff, because I don't either. So it's funny, like in my notes when he says something, I'm like phonetically typing it out so I can remember how to say it. Like a Catator or whatever, I would have like A-CAY-DA-.
Did you notice he changed the pronunciation?
Yeah, I was wondering if I was like, did I write that wrong down?
Yeah.
Or did I write that down wrong the first time, or did he just change it?
Yeah, and maybe he realized it was pronounced a different way. Like, because I do know he has like a history of using Latin with his names, and so maybe in hindsight he was like, oh, it's actually would have been pronounced this way, or
yeah,
I don't know.
Could be that, or honest, could just be slip of the tongue, or just, you know, because like, you know, Matt's done that a million times. Like the first time he'll say an NPC, says it one way, but then it like colloquially becomes something else. But yeah, I did notice that. But yeah, loving the lore.
So we had a party. We met 2 fairies from the Witch of the Wind and Stars.
Yes.
And had just a very interesting conversation. I think like the macro conversation is like you mentioned in the recap, this curse was keeping her from like ascending to her proper position, and then like once the curse was lifted, it was like, I think of like a sonar like blip, like, oh, she's there is one.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. I personally don't have much to say about it other than just like, it's very interesting, like who would gain from preventing that. I'm very curious about that.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts there?
Not specifically on that, other than like conversations we've kind of had already, like with the, like what's going on with the stranger we at least know specifically that the stranger is trying to utilize a weakened or absent Witch of the World's Heart. That's not to say he was the one that cursed Ame necessarily.
What I was going to say, separate from that, was just more lore stuff. functional pieces around these familiars, these fairies,
Mm,
and specifically this thing around giving a name, which
yeah.
there's been this theme around names, and there's power in a name,
Hmm.
and stronger creatures have more than one name. Here are two fairies that I guess had no name, which on the hierarchy does that mean you're like at the very bottom, and by like bequeathing a name, like it was very Dobby-esque for me,
Yeah.
from Harry Potter.
Yeah.
What was your take on that whole thing?
Yeah. I was very interested in that, especially to kind of, I feel like it was a deliberate choice from Brennan to kind of juxtapose that with the whole name ceremony with Suvi. Like we were kind of seeing like almost a pinnacle of a name. Not really. I mean, there's obviously far more powerful people than Suvi, but like that whole ceremony versus this peon that when it gets a name, it dies. So like, I don't know if you viewed it this way, but for me, it wanted to die. Like it wanted release. So for me, I was viewing it as like this thing has been subjugated, and which I mean, familiars kind of by definition are like subjugated by their master and work for their master. Obviously, they're more comforting versions of that, like with Ame and the fox. But the way this was presented, it made me feel like, this thing was either created or subjugated by the Witch of the Wind and the Stars and like forced to do her bidding. And so it's like, give me a name so I can please escape this dreadful existence. Otherwise, I don't know why they would be so excited to get a name when they just explode, you know?
Well, maybe they just, maybe I'm the more optimist on this conversation. Like maybe they ascended in a way that leaves behind their physical form. Like maybe they're spirits in their nature, and by getting a name, they can return to the spirit realm or something. I don't know.
Okay.
Otherwise, it is pretty like, yes, give me a name, and then now I'm dead. So, I mean, definitely paints that witch in a much more negative light.
True. I could see that, like they're being like trapped or forced. And so they want release, and maybe not to just die into nothingness, but to maybe like return to the spirit realm or something. I could see that. But in any case, though, it did feel like especially the second one that really wanted a name, and like Suvi kind of was like flirting with like, ooh, I want it. Like, I think if they did give it a name, it was just going to explode. But it didn't seem like it was gonna, they thought
I think it was going to explode, but I don't. No, I think they thought that is maybe why they were hesitant to do it, is they were like, maybe we shouldn't do this. But I'm uncertain as to the implication of the explosion, whether they are in agony and want to explode, or whether things are as they seem and it is actually death. I have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, and it's probably like not a big thing at all, but it will be interesting to see if when Ame does meet with this witch, if she's like upset that you gave my familiar a name, you owe me a new familiar type of thing or something. And again, I don't know if using the word familiar is appropriate here or not, because they're fairies and, there were multiple of them.
Familiar is the right word only because I think Silver used that word later on.
Well, I think he did, and it's because Suvi did, because that's what she didn't say fairy, she said familiar. And so I don't know if that was just like a in the moment, like kind of a slip of the tongue, or if it was like intentional.
That's a good point, actually.
But yeah, so I'm very curious. And so Ame, there's no World's Heart Witch. Now there kind of is. But Ame's been out of commission for a month, and even prior to that, there's been a number of weeks where she's left the Fane of Power, that is that cottage or whatever, and has been traveling around. So like I think the Witch of the Wind and the Stars mentioned like many notices have been sent. There's been no reply. And so that's why it's kind of come to this point of I've sent familiar fairies to the Citadel to find you. Mm-hmm. But one, I wanted some clarification if you picked up on it. Were they saying that Mr. Soup, who is the spirit that is kind of watching over the place while Ame is gone, were they saying that even Mr. Soup wasn't answering, or were they saying like, we've been looking for you and all we get is Mr. Soup?
I think it's the latter. Like, we've been sending missives, like giving them to Mr. Soup, who's kind of like been collecting your mail.
Okay.
That's kind of the impression I got.
That's what I thought too, but I wasn't fully clear, and I was like, wait, are they saying Mr. Soup is like MIA? But there didn't seem to be any sense of urgency or like anything, so I didn't think that was the case.
It's like 20 episodes later, Brennan's like, you really should check on him.
He's dead. But yeah, so I'm curious what, like, I mean, clearly they're part of a coven, so I'm sure this is in some ways just like formalities or like official goings on that must happen now that there's a new one. But I'm curious what this witch wants, and like, is it formality? Is it new? And if so, like, why aren't the other witches getting in contact? Or maybe they've tried, or maybe Indri is like specifically the one in charge of this. But we at least know that it wasn't Marara. Was that her name?
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't her. And yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is I'm just curious what she wants, and if it's related to all of these other bigger things that we've been talking about this episode.
Yeah. It definitely feels like hey, this is going to be a plot thread, but maybe not the most pressing one. Because it feels like the most pressing one, it feels like Brennan's laying groundwork. Actually, I don't know. Because I think Silver leaving, I'm like, is that the direction they're going to go? Like, we're going to go to that garrison? But then there's this weird thing about Archmage Saber missing, or like not being, maybe missing too strong of a word. It was missing, right?
Yeah, like their main guardian couldn't find them. So that.
Yeah, because Archmage Saber was Silver's mentor.
Correct. Yeah.
Correct. So,
and Saber is the military one,
right,
of the 5.
Yeah.
But then we don't have any. I don't think we have any context for Fort Kieran, which is the one that Saber mentioned had fallen, or not Saber, Silver had mentioned had fallen. Right. Yeah, I mean, so are those two things connected? Like, they kind of seem like they would be. Like, the military mage is missing, and we just lost a fort, but we know that Saber at least was in the Citadel like an hour earlier, and this fort is presumably somewhere else.
Yeah, I actually missed the detail that Saber was the military person, and so I thought they were just two different plot threads, like where are they going to go? But knowing that, it feels like there would have to be a connection.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, I don't think these two things are connected in the Witch of the Wind and the Stars breaching the Citadel, which they seem to be concerned about, and whatever's going on with the military stuff. So I don't think those are connected, but I certainly think Silver's gonna think there's a connection. Like, oh, the same night a powerful witch managed to breach our defenses and get in here, and an Archmage goes missing. You know, like, I wonder if that's gonna cause any. Well, he's obviously leaving, but I still wonder if that plot point will cause any friction between like the Citadel powers that be and Ame. If they find out. I mean, I guess they'd probably still tell Steel at least. But yeah, real quick on the Archmages, they weren't like explicitly all explained what they were, but we know Silence is like the top dog seemingly. Brennan mentioned like being ancient, I think, when he described him. So that made me really curious about like how old are these people. But Saber was described as a military mage. Sand was just described as like being very beautiful. Sorrow was described as being kind of like hooded and like you couldn't really see their face, and kind of like secretive is how I took it. Serenity was described as being like short, kind of fat, like jolly almost. And that's all of them. And then Silence, obviously. So, you know, with ones like Saber, it's more clear of like what their role is, but it's just really interesting to think about like how the duties of these 5 are split. And we also got the impression up until this point, and I mean, I guess still through this point, but that like Silence was kind of like senile, like he's sleeping all the time. Like Suvi was kind of mad that like that was her assignment. But it's interesting to know that he like literally is like the top dog, ancient. Like, yeah, I'm curious. Like, it is both can be true. Like maybe he
Yeah,
is just
right.
at the end of his life and is not that potent anymore. But I just made me wonder, you know.
Yeah, the whole like not fully cogent thing for me feels more like an intentional story point in that first episode to like help spur on the reason for Suvi needing to leave. Like, I need to get out of here. Like, I'm
Yeah.
wasting my potential. And not to like retcon that or downplay it, but it feels like dude was taking a nap, and yet at the same time, it's like you said, this is the most powerful one of the five. So, though it's interesting that being true, we haven't really gotten any insight on like Suvi's apprenticeship. Which are there more than one? I can't remember. Like, does she have other like peers?
I think the
I think so,
implication is
right?
that like all of the archmages have apprentices. I don't know if like Silence has more than Suvi, like if that's what you're asking.
Well, all I was getting at was like, you know, if you're the apprentice to like the main person,
Right.
I guess it's a bit of a plot hole for me of like, you'd think there'd be like a more earnest or eager, I don't know. Maybe it is that he's just that in name alone and title alone, and it really like use like a lack of potency, a loss of potency. Maybe that's why there's a disinterest there. I don't know, but I'm curious if we're going to get more of an interaction with Sky and there's so many S names, man. I can never keep track of them.
Yeah.
Silence.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think you were, again, I think both things can be true, but I think you were kind of hitting the nail on the head with like, that was kind of the impetus for the story all along, is that Suvi was kind of restless and bored. And I do think it also makes sense that like Silence could be omega powerful and yet still just the bureaucracy and the way you move up the corporate ladder, as it were, is like, hey, you have to be an assistant, you know, like being someone's apprentice is not learning the coolest spells and going into battle with them. It's no, like you got to write their books and you got to do this. So I think both those things can be true, you know, like Silence could be all that in a bag of chips, but still in essence of being an apprentice, you're doing the busy, boring work.
Yeah, true. Yeah, it's like, you know, the amazing professor who has the grad assistant who, you know, writes up all the things and reads all the sources and gets the lit reviews together and, you know, what have you.
But I'm not saying this is the case, but it would be kind of interesting if on some level that was even like a mask, like being the old senile mage.
Like the Game of Thrones character. I can't think of his name. Master Pie or something. Pycelle.
I know who you're talking about. Oh yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it'd
be interesting.
Yeah. And it makes me curious how old all of the archmages are, because at least Silence is the only one that was like described as old, but like they're all like maybe Silence is just that much older. Like I wonder if even like the young beautiful Sand is still like old, or if she's just like a prodigy. Yeah, really curious to find out more about like what each of them do. And then the military one being missing, a fort going down. We know there's like a Illuminati within the Citadel. Like, have they made a move? Is that what's happening here? Could one of them be one of the League of Whispers? One of the Archmages, I mean. Wait, I'm getting confused again. Which one is the good guy secret squad? Is that the Akatator? Okay, so League of Whispers was the bad guys.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd think that probably at least somebody high up is a member.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting plot thread. The potential of one of the five being a member of the League of Whispers, for sure. I think there's a pretty solid bet on something like that, for sure.
Agreed. There was something else I wanted to touch on, and I've lost it, but I'm looking through my notes. Is there anything else you specifically wanted to touch on?
I was just gonna say, I feel like we've kind of got our setting set. And I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of get a more central idea of where this arc is going in the next episode. So it feels like Brennan has laid the groundwork of the heroes rest and rejuvenate and recover. Here's a couple of tiny details of things that are happening. And then kind of like a more, not like, you know, the Citadel is going to explode next episode, but I think we are going to have a more central idea of what's going to be the plot thread of this arc very soon.
I agree. I think that military base falling is kind of like the first domino in what's going to be a big thing. And then the witch storyline, which those two things might be tangentially connected, but at least right now, I don't think they're connected. I did think of one other thing. The Tamori that came in and spoke to Ursula. I looked, you were right. That is like the spell brought to life. But that makes me really curious now. Because again, I mean, I can't remember the guy's name, but the bakery owner that was also a Tamori. Not to take away from their agency or intelligence, but to me, I got that, like, okay, it is alive, but it's still like is very like simple. It serves like a singular purpose. Like, I run the bakery, you know. So really interesting to me that a Tamori is like the guard of one of the archmages. Like, I didn't think that they would be like sophisticated enough to have like that important of a role. So that's very interesting to me to find that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the level of sophistication, I think you can be sophisticated and yet be centrally programmed, if that makes sense. Like, this is your one job, and yet you have a number of capabilities to make sure it's like the Terminator, right? You know, version 1 versus like whatever latest version there is. But so I could see that being true still, even though it's still like I keep saying centrally programmed, but like programmed for a certain purpose.
Yeah. And not to take away from like the bakery guy, but I feel like kind of the whole conversation in that episode was Ame, like, you know, wrestling with like the philosophical question of like, what does this mean? Right. And like the general consensus was like, well, they're not people. Like, well, this was kind of like I feel like presented. But so then this was just super interesting to me. And you made me think of two things. Like, one, I wonder if there are levels to it. Like, are all Tamori equal, or like if more spellcasting is put into it, can there be like a more complex version? And then also, if this thing is good enough to be the guard of an archmage, it's got to be capable to some extent, right? So like, think about their military capability. Like, why aren't they just sending in armies of Tamori? You know, that's a whole nother like philosophical moral question. But like, and maybe they do. But
well, I think to put limits on it, like, you know, Mage Hand can only live 5 pounds, right? Like, maybe this guard is, you know, what's the shield cantrip or whatever it is, personified. I don't know.
That would be interesting.
But like, you know, they militarily, it is a guard, but not like, you know, we're talking about like the traffic person who keeps the traffic while the president drives through. You know, it's like a secret service agent. So, but I don't know, who knows?
Yeah, that's a good point though. But yeah, so like when I was listening to the episode, I didn't remember that that's what Tamori meant, so it didn't really I just thought it was like a race. But so yeah, when you pointed that out, it made a lot of thoughts start rolling. But yeah, I think I still can't remember the other thing. So I think that's the main things I wanted to hit. Yeah.
Well, same here. And definitely if there's other things that you guys are thinking about or wondering about, there was a lot of lore in this episode. I'd say one, feel free just to drop a comment with any insight or question you might have. Maybe something you figured out if you want to clue us in on. But then secondly, we do, again, a plug for the Discord. We have a channel specifically for Worlds Beyond Number that you're welcome to jump in. We love this show and we'd love to talk to you about it. So I felt like a very desperate, like, please. So anyway, anything else, my friend?
I don't think so. I think that's it.
Well, make sure you're checking out our content. We have content almost every day. We have the Discord. We have our watch party on Sunday, our Sunday Fun Day, and our Friday weekly wrap up. So you're welcome to any of those things.
Pop.
Yep. We'll see you later.
Bye, y'all.